everybody for making the time. My name is Santiago Lyon, and I head up advocacy and education for something called the Content Authenticity Initiative that I'll describe in a second. My background, primarily in journalism. I spent 35 years working in journalism in a variety of roles. I was vice president and director of photography at the Associated Press for almost 15 years. Prior to that, I spent a decade as a war photographer, also for the AP. I photographed 9 wars on 4 continents, had all kinds of harrowing experiences in the service of bringing truth to subscribers and viewers of AP content. And before that, I was a general news and sports photographer, photographing Olympics, World Cups, politics, etc. So clearly, this work that I'm doing now is an extension of my life's work in journalism, and I feel very fortunate to have spent the last 5 years working on the Content Authenticity Initiative. So this initiative was founded by Adobe way back in late 2019, which seems like an age ago. And it was started because our research scientists were sort of peering around the corner and could very clearly see what was coming, in the sense that AI was gradually ramping up, and it was clear that it was going to be a massive, highly sophisticated set of tools. And so while Adobe and a lot of other companies want to, embrace AI for creative and business purposes, we also thought that it was absolutely important to set some safeguards into place, and that's where the initiative really got going. We live in a world where, with a few keystrokes, I can create a video like this. And we live in a world where images like this are making the rounds, purporting to show, victims of flooding in North Carolina last year. And these images were getting widely distributed on social media because people were connecting with the emotional pull of the images, whether it was the little child or the puppy or both. And the emotional pull sort of outweighed any questioning around the veracity of the images. And so this is the world really that we live in, and why things like the Content Authenticity Initiative become so important as we seek to understand where files come from. The initiative has grown significantly since late 2019. We're now well past 5,000 members. These are some of the more recognizable brands, perhaps, news media companies, hardware, software, advertising, social media, etc. And we think it's the weight, size, and heft of this community that's actually going to make this initiative ultimately successful. So what are we focused on? We're focused on this notion of provenance, which is a term that some of you might be familiar with from the art world, the provenance of a painting. Where did it come from? Who owned it, etc. In this instance, we're talking about the provenance of digital files, the basic facts about the origins of a piece of digital content, whatever the format, and how it might have been created, altered in the editing process, and ultimately published, and then sharing some or all of that information with the viewer so that they can make a better informed decision about the nature of what it is they're looking at and decide whether or not to trust it. But it's important to sort of look at this in context, because when we got started here, one of the first places we looked at was the area of detection, which is somewhat different to provenance. Detection involves taking already created files and uploading them to programs that look for telltale signs of manipulation, things like inconsistent pixel structures, impossible lighting sources, etc. And while detection can certainly be useful on an ad hoc basis, it has a number of problems. One, at its very best, it's only about 98% accurate, which sounds great until you consider that that 2% could account for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of files. It's not scalable in its current form. It takes a little bit too long to run assets through detection programs. And it's invariably an arms race with bad actors trying to stay one step ahead of the latest software. So while we recognize the value of detection, and indeed the detection community benefits from the provenance work that we're doing, we're not focused on detection per se. In addition to provenance, we are focused on policy. We spend a lot of time briefing lawmakers and policymakers around the world, because what we're seeing is that legislation is being enacted to mandate some level of transparency around the use of AI, and we think it's important that those legislators understand all the complexities and nuances in order to craft sensible and useful legislation. We also spend a lot of time thinking about education, really three different kinds of education here: classroom education for young people, societal education, and consumer education. And as our work develops and as provenance technologies become more ubiquitous, the education part of it becomes more and more important. But as I mentioned, we're really focused for the purposes of this presentation on provenance. And so provenance then in this context really becomes about proving what things are as opposed to detecting what they are not. And the journey is quite interesting. We've been working with creators around attribution and protection from data scraping. News media companies are interested in this to bolster the trust that's inherent to all journalism. Generative AI companies are interested in terms of transparency and complying with legislation. Corporations are interested in brand reputation, consumer protection. Insurance companies, how does an insurance company know that the image accompanying a claim is actually real? Ditto for auditing. Law enforcement, this is a huge area where courts are being challenged to understand the veracity of digital evidence. And there's a whole host of other examples that you can see there. And so what this tells us is that in this time of tremendous uncertainty around the nature of what it is we're looking at, there are a whole host of industries out there who rely on the authenticity of the material that they distribute or share with their customers. And as a result, provenance is fast becoming table stakes for a whole suite of industries out there who need to be able to say with confidence and make guarantees to their customer bases about the nature of what it is they're distributing. So that's the ecosystem, that's the landscape, if you like, that we live in currently. Now we're going to jump into the technology and introduce this concept of content credentials. Content credentials come from an underlying standards organization that I'll get to in a second, called the C2PA that you just heard about. But you can think about content credentials as a digital nutrition label for online content. In the same way that you would see a nutrition label on every product at the supermarket, you can now see digital nutrition labels for digital content. We're working on this for photos, video, audio, Gen AI, and more. And in order to get this to work across a very complex digital ecosystem, we have had to divide the work up into a number of areas. So we're working with camera manufacturers and smartphone manufacturers to integrate these technologies into their hardware devices so that when you buy a camera or a smartphone, it comes out of the box with C2PA technology already on it, and you can choose to activate or deactivate it depending on the default setting, but it allows you to say this device was used to create this particular asset and sort of traces the asset from the moment of creation. We're also working across the editing area. Of course, Adobe has a number of well-regarded editing programs: Photoshop, Lightroom, Premiere, etc. This is already incorporated into many of those, as well as non-editing programs, non-Adobe programs, because it's important to note that all of the C2PA's work is open source, which is to say nobody owns it, there's no IP involved, anybody can implement it. And so we are working to help those implementations, including with Adobe's business competitors. Publishing, we're working with publishers and in particular content management system providers, as well as content distribution network providers. So the likes of Cloudflare, Fastly, Akamai, as well as all the CMS providers. And the goal here is to maintain the integrity of the content credential in the publishing process so that we can then share some or all of the information with the viewer through that little CR icon that you see there, indicating that there is a content credential and there is underlying information. And that's the goal, is to make the content credential useful and as ubiquitous and widely understood as, let's say, the copyright symbol or the Creative Commons symbol, indicating that there is underlying information. And if the viewer is curious or has a question, they can access that information and based on that, make a better informed decision about what it is they're looking at. When it comes to the technology, we recommend that implementers use three components of resilience that are included in the C2PA technical specification. So the first is cryptographically secure metadata. This is what's called public key infrastructure technology, not dissimilar to what you use for online banking or other secure internet transactions. We combine that with invisible watermarking, and in addition, we add fingerprinting technologies, which capture some information about the file, store it on the cloud, allowing you to compare the asset you have at hand with the material previously stored on the cloud. This trifecta is very, very resilient. In isolation, each of these things have their vulnerabilities, but when you combine them like this, you have what's called a durable content credential, which will generally survive the journey, understanding that metadata often gets stripped off, etc. So that's the technical recommendation and the underlying stuff. We're also offering in some applications this notion of creator opt-out. So when creators do not want their information to be used by data scraping companies, they can put this label onto their content indicating that they don't want their material to be used for training purposes. Of course, that's dependent on the data scrapers respecting that, and that in turn will be informed by legislation and by jurisprudence and court cases that are currently underway that vary in their outcome. In some cases, they favor the plaintiff. In other cases, they don't, and we'll have to see how that plays out over time. But this is an early sort of flag in the sand, if you like, for people to say, I don't want my material to be used for data training. When it comes to AI, Adobe has a suite of generative AI products called Firefly, text to video, text to image, and every Firefly product gets a content credential attached upon download. If I were to come across this image of penguins in the desert, and if everything was supported by the publisher, I would click on the little CR icon and it exposes the nutrition label, in this case, telling me it came from Adobe Photoshop and Firefly. The good news is that in addition to Adobe, OpenAI is now attaching content credentials upon download to material generated by DALL-E 3, their text-to-image program, as well as Sora 2, their text-to-video program. And so what we're seeing is in the generative AI space, there is an appetite by providers to attach content credentials, either because they're interested in transparency and or because of impending legislation. For example, the EU's AI Act goes into force next August, and that is going to mandate transparency around the use of generative AI tools. So good progress in that space. In video, we've created a dynamic player that supports C2PA. If you consider video to be, in essence, hundreds of thousands of still images in sequence, this allows you to track the provenance at a particular moment in the video. So the line here is blue, everything is good, until it's not. The line is red. What changed? Perhaps the audio changed, perhaps something else was altered. You can inspect the video at that particular moment and see what's up. And that's important because, as our friend from Sinclair just indicated, Mike Palmer, this is really a big deal in the video space. And the good news is that, manufacturers are coming out. Sony just came out with a new camcorder that supports C2PA, and we're working hard in the video space. There are also a host of archival use cases here. The Library of Congress is in conversation with C2PA, as is the National Archive in the United Kingdom. So the notion of retrofitting credentials to existing archives, or adding them while things are being digitized, or displaying on interfaces, or attaching credentials upon download, those are all things that are being explored and investigated, because obviously our archives are our digital memory, and archival content is constantly being recycled to illustrate things in current affairs, etc. But as indicated, all of this comes out of this organization, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, or C2PA. These companies that you see here are on the steering committee of the C2PA, which is a standards organization living in the Linux Foundation as a joint development foundation project. That means that all of the output of the C2PA is open source, as I indicated. Nobody owns it. There's no IP involved. Anybody can use it. You're not beholden to a particular technology company. And there are now over 300 tech companies involved crafting the C2PA standard, which is constantly getting updated to reflect learnings and advancements in other areas of technology. Adobe chairs the technical working group of the C2PA, and it's on its way to becoming an ISO standard, an International Standards Organization standard, which is huge because that will give it that additional seal of legitimacy. It's clear that C2PA, when it comes to provenance technologies, is best in class. And it's being adopted, as you'll see in a minute, by a whole host of other organizations. So the way that we distinguish then between these two acronyms, the C2PA is the blueprint upon which everything is based, and the Content Authenticity Initiative is aimed at accelerating implementation of the C2PA standard. And so we do that in three different ways. We build open source tools. There's a robust suite of open source tools that live on GitHub. We run a very vibrant Discord channel to answer developers' questions with educational material, etc. Number two, we productize this. This is in Adobe products. It's also obviously being adopted by other non-Adobe users, so Microsoft, LinkedIn, Google. There's a whole host of other companies adopting C2PA, so the productization is important. And the third is advocacy and education, so the opportunity to speak about this work, raise awareness, highlight best practices, host online and in real person events, really the storytelling around the progress that we continue to make every day and have done since inception. So that's how we sort of think about the C2PA versus the CAI. I'm going to show you some examples now of what's going on in this space. All of these companies are busy implementing C2PA. Not all of them are members of the CAI. The CAI is an organization, a community organization. Some of these companies choose to just use the C2PA in their own way, and that's perfectly fine. But as you can see here, it's a very impressive list of companies. News media, hardware, software, government, etc. We're also running a conformance program right now so that implementers can do this in a standardized way. This is the link between the security, the trust, and the interoperability. And the beauty of having a common standard is that it is interoperable and different implementations of it can be useful and talk to one another, as it were. This conformance program is now up and running, and it ensures that generator and validator products meet the specification and security requirements, providing the final critical link. And we're also transitioning to a new trust list, replacing a previous temporary interim trust list. So this indicates which implementers are conformant and can be trusted. So that work is currently underway, and there's a whole host of companies that are involved in getting certified as conformant. In Adobe tools, of course, it's in Firefly, as I mentioned. It's also in a host of other apps: Photoshop, Lightroom, Bridge, Fresco, Behance, Frame.io, Stock, and Adobe Content Authenticity is the latest edition. Adobe Content Authenticity is a free web-based app that allows creators to add content credentials after the fact and link them to their identity, proving that the work comes from them by linking it to social handles and other forms of identity, and as I indicated, offering them the opportunity to indicate their preference when it comes to training. So that's already out there. We're already doing stuff in the enterprise space as well, because there are a lot of companies who want to implement C2PA and aren't sure how. So Adobe and other companies are spinning up enterprise content credentials. And in this case, we're seeing some interesting use case patterns. For example, attribution, indicating that something leaving an organization actually came from that organization. So if a financial institution is providing investment advice to its customers in the form of videos or other content, being able to say this actually came from that financial institution. Wayfinding, this is the ability to use content credentials to track assets in their supply chain. So let's say I receive a takedown notice and I'm in a big company, a multinational that has scores of offices and different iterations of digital asset management systems. It can be hard to track down all the assets. Using content credentials is a great way to simplify that process. And then lastly, the bill of materials, understanding how an asset was created or modified. And this allows people to comply with whatever policies their company have around the use of AI, et cetera. So attribution, wayfinding, bill of materials, these are all of interest in the corporate space, in the enterprise space, and we're working to create API-based solutions to make this a reality. And as I indicated, other companies are exploring this space as well. I'm going to show you a quick little 1-minute video now that shows, illustrates quite clearly how this will work in Photoshop, for example, where it already exists. So I'm going to enable this in Photoshop. preview the image. This image already has a content credential because it came from Adobe stock. All of that stuff already does. Now what I'm going to do is manipulate the image, cool down the colors, add some AI clouds to the background, take another image on top, layer it over, clear it up a little bit, and all of a sudden I have an image purporting to show the pyramids in a blizzard. Great. Now what I'm going to do is attach the content credential to this. I'm going to export it. Now imagine it pops up in a social media site and snowy pyramids. CR tells me it came out of Photoshop. Great. But when I hit inspect, it takes me to the back end. I can see the component parts of the image. And then with this little slider, I'm able to see what did I start with and what did I end with. So that's a functionality that's technically feasible. And we're working with our partners to make it more ubiquitous and get it out there. In terms of implementations, Google just put this C2PA content credentials into their Pixel 10 phone. Samsung has it in their latest Galaxy phone in the AI part of that. Camera manufacturers are out there, Leica, Nikon, Sony, all busy productizing this. You'll see some advancements there in the coming months in all likelihood. Leica is the industry leader in this. They've been out there for almost 2 years with this technology, which is great to see. Camcorders, as I indicated, Sony is now supporting this in this latest camcorder that they've rolled out. OpenAI, as I indicated, is using this in a number of areas. SmartFrame, which is a licensing firm in the UK, is using this. BBC is busy incorporating content credentials. LinkedIn, that's been available for a while, and what you're going to see now is some enhancement where you'll be able to, using Adobe Content Authenticity, the app I mentioned, together with LinkedIn, you'll be able to put your identity onto LinkedIn posts with content credentials, which is great. And then national security, DVIDs, which is the Pentagon's platform for distributing official imagery from the U.S. military. They've been supporting content credentials for a while, allowing you to see details about where assets were generated, as well as the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which is an important multinational intelligence alliance. They're using content credentials to bolster security around communications. And then lastly, if there's a call to action here, it's join us. The Content Authenticity Initiative is free to join. This QR code will take you to our website, contentauthenticity.org. And we welcome anybody, individuals, companies, organizations, academics, researchers, really anybody. And what membership gets you is under the umbrella, if you like, of the provenance community, access to online events, blog posts, awareness, the ability to highlight your implementations as they develop. And that's really the Content Authenticity Initiative in a nutshell, or